The United States conducts a B-52 overflight in the South China Sea, which garnered a response from Beijing. But that's not the only nation conducting operations in disputed areas. Are we looking at a possible North Korean missile launch this week? Plus, South Koreans involved in a slavery ring take their government to task. These stories and regional headlines are next. This is the Asia Brief. Greetings and salutations, my excellent friends. Steve Miller here on this Monday, the 16th of November, 2015. Thank you so much for joining me today. Now, I know I said I wouldn't have any new podcasts this week, but I found that I had a little extra time, so I thought I'd give one Asia Brief this week before taking the time off the rest of the week. Now, before we begin, I'd like to extend my thoughts and prayers to everyone around the world dealing with acts of violence. It goes far beyond just Paris. Now, remember, ISIS is a cancer that has spread around the globe, and it needs to be eradicated. And more than just dealing physical attacks to ISIS headquarters, we need to eliminate the draw that is enticing those who have been disenfranchised to join the Islamic State. Now, let's go ahead and begin with today's podcast in the South China Sea. U.S. defense officials say that two B-52 bombers flew near contested islands in the South China Sea. The bombers originated from a base in Guam. Commander Bill Urban, a Pentagon spokesman, said that the bombers conducted a routine mission in international airspace in the vicinity of the Spratly Islands on November 8th and November 9th. The planes did receive two verbal warnings from Chinese ground controllers. This is despite the planes never venturing past 15 nautical miles in a bubble around any feature. Both aircraft, according to reports, continued along their mission without incident and at times operated fully in accordance with international law. Now, Pentagon Press Secretary Peter Cook also confirmed the flight, which he said was not out of the ordinary. Cook said, "I know we conduct B-52 flights in international airspace in that part of the world all the time." Now, what was interesting is how China responded. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman Hong Lei on Friday said Beijing opposes the action of undermining China's sovereignty and security under the pretext of freedom of navigation and overflight. Really, what threat? The B-52s were in international airspace, and they had every right to be there. This is reminiscent of their claims in the East China Sea. China simply believes that the entire area is their own personal sandbox and no one is allowed in without their permission. China is gravely mistaken if nations like the United States and others will continue to sit back and let China rule the area. But the United States wasn't the only nation carrying out operations in disputed waters. Japan announced Friday that it was monitoring a Chinese intelligence vessel operating near disputed waters for the very first time. Japan's defense ministry said late Thursday a P-3C patrol craft observed a Dongdao-class intelligence vessel operating near the Senkaku Islands, which China also claims as their own and names them Diaoyu. The ship reportedly moved back and forth several times until Thursday evening before leaving. Tokyo announced that the Chinese vessel never breached the 12 nautical mile barrier that signifies territorial waters. But here's the funny thing. Hong Lei said when discussing the matter, the Chinese naval vessel is conducting normal activities. It is in line with international law. There is nothing disputable about that. So apparently, international norms are all right for China to carry out, but not for anyone else. Come on now. If China continues this line of reasoning, we will see more freedom of navigation and overflight missions, not just from the big parties in the region, but from smaller countries as well. Seoul officials this past weekend announced that North Korea issued a week-long no-sail warning in the waters off of its east coast. Some observers state that this announcement could indicate that Pyongyang is preparing a missile test. A South Korean army official indicated that North Korea typically does not carry out missile tests in the winter season, but added there are cases when they can be fired for political or military reasons, so South Korea will be observing the situation closely. A different army official pointed out, North Korea possesses technology that can separate a ballistic missile into submissiles at a high altitude and cause large damage to a wide area. Though this missile is meant to be fired long range, they may test it on adjacent waters to check if this technology properly works. Don't forget that back in May, North Korea tested a submarine-launched ballistic missile, or SLBM, and some believe they may be test firing it once more. But it is also wise to point out that in cases in the past, during this particular time period, the winter, Pyongyang has declared no sail zones and never fired any missiles. Some analysts also believe that North Korea could be trying to send a diplomatic message to both South Korea, United States, and even Japan, as the three countries try to solidify their trilateral security pact. Van Jackson, a former Pentagon strategist who currently serves as an associate professor at the Asia-Pacific Center for Security Studies, said the United States should consider replacing the six-party talks on North Korea's nuclear program with a smaller group of talks that also deals with arms control in addition to denuclearization. Jackson said, quote, "I agree with the Obama administration's view that the change of negotiation format is unlikely to denuclearize North Korea. However, the question before us is not how to denuclearize North Korea, but how to curb its nuclear progress. Do we allow North Korea to develop a secure second strike nuclear capability, which is what the current policy impasse will lead to, or do we seek to freeze inspection and gradual rollback of its nuclear program? Do we make the Korean Peninsula a violent and risky place, or a strategically stable place?" But with Pyongyang not showing any interest in talks of any nature, what's the point? Well, the hope is that the recognition of the six-party talks being an utter and complete failure, a broken process, that we can move into something that will yield a desired result. But what kind of result? What kind of desired outcome? The DPRK and the West have completely different goals, and unless discussions are entered where there is mutual respect, talks will simply go nowhere. Earlier this year, the Associated Press released a month-long investigation into human slavery operations in South Korea's southern portion. These were horrific stories of mentally disabled individuals being rounded up and in some cases being forced to work on salt farms in the South for years. And what's more alarming is that officials knowingly allowed it to happen. Now, in a follow-up report, 8 men who have been previously enslaved in South Korean salt farms have now taken the government to court and alleged negligence, and that South Korean police inaction largely caused their prolonged ordeal. The lawsuit was filed in Seoul District Court, and the lawyers are seeking compensation of 30 million won, or $25,860 for each individual. They're seeking the compensation from not only the central government, but also the 2 island counties where the farms were located. While 60 slaves were freed last year, dozens of farm owners and even job brokers were indicted, but no regional police or officials were punished, despite in multiple interviews where the victims said that some officials knew about the slaves and even stopped their escape attempts. Chae Jung-kyu is one of several lawyers working on the lawsuit and is expecting an uphill battle, as compensation lawsuits against the government on human rights abuses are rarely successful in South Korea. This is mainly because the burden of proof falls on the plaintiffs and not the government. Chae said, quote, "It is difficult because we are mainly relying on what our plaintiffs told us, while the defendant, which is the government, holds all the information to prove it can't be forced to give them up." End quote. Now, regardless of the outcome, Chae says the case is important because it brings about awareness to the situation. Hopefully Mr. Chae is right, because in that original AP interview, some said that slavery was just a way of life down there. And now taking a look at other regional headlines. Scientists are now warning that toxic fumes from the Indonesian slash-and-burn operations that created the trans-boundary haze issue may actually be causing more harm to humans than the environment. The National Legislative Assembly in Thailand last week approved the bill to call up military reserves to help the country in times of natural disaster, a state of emergency, martial law, or war. It's official. Aung San Suu Kyi's National League for Democracy Party proved to be too much for the incumbents and locked in a supermajority in the nation's first open election in 25 years. Suu Kyi met with key leaders over the weekend to ensure a smooth transition of power, despite the Nobel laureate being prohibited from being able to hold the nation's highest office. The Seoul Central District Court ordered Nippon Steel and Sumitomo Metal Corporation, a legacy company from World War II, to pay 100 million won, or about $86,000 to each of the plaintiffs in a court, citing the illegality of forced mobilization. The court did not recognize the company's stance that all payments to South Korea were settled in 1965 during the bilateral treaty arrangement that normalized relations with Japan. This difference of opinion on the matter extends to not only this issue, but compensation calls when addressing the issue about comfort women. Japan has ordered companies not to pay in the past. Experts from the International Monetary Fund say that the UN should be included in its reserve currencies, noting the move would strengthen the world's financial system. China requested the inclusion last year, but the UN was considered to be too tightly controlled. IMF chief Christine Lagarde said the UN meets the requirements to be a freely usable currency. And finally, estimates are that about 130,000 protesters gathered in downtown Seoul on Saturday. The group was formed by a number of factions protesting a number of government programs, ranging from labor laws to state-sponsored textbooks. Police were on the scene to prohibit the group from marching towards the president's residence, and some scuffles were reported. A total of 51 people were arrested, and the government has vowed to take action against any state employees found to have participated in the largely peaceful protest. Well, my friends, those are today's stories. Don't forget, I will be tied up for the remainder of the week with school, but I will be back on Monday of next week. So please take a moment now and let me know your thoughts on these or other stories I share throughout the week, because I would really love to hear from you. Remember to be true to yourself and to always be awesome.